breaking away from the NHS, some of Tavistock's former staff have set up their own private gender service. Gender Plus has plans to offer sex hormones to patients over 16 from the autumn. Well, Times Radio reporter Jo Crawford was granted exclusive access inside Gender Plus, spoke to its director and clinical psychologist, Dr. Aidan Kelly, and Jo's in the studio this morning. Jo, why did you go and see Gender Plus?
So I personally found that the trans debate has become very heated and polarised, and there's just a lack of room to ask questions and be genuinely curious. So I found that also there was a lack of clarity about what's actually going on inside these gender clinics. Last year, the CAS review was published and it collated the concerns and criticisms of the practices of NHS gender services, resulting in Tavistock receiving an inadequate rating. But Dr. Aidan Kelly, he was a co-author to an open letter which stated that this review failed to provide a representative voice of clinical psychologists. And so this resulted in a statement that was misleading and contributed to an atmosphere of fear rather than one of curiosity and understanding. So I really wanted to take him up on that and be like, hey, let's have this calm conversation where I can say to you, these are the concerns of the CAS review and more generally of the public. I'm genuinely curious and I just want to hear what you have to say about it.
So let's find out. They do what's called gender assessment. What does that involve?
So one session could cost between £225 to £275. And it's basically a minimum of 6 sessions over 6 months for those under 18. And at least one of those appointments has to be in person. But this can vary per person, as you might need to have even more sessions. It might take longer. But Dr. Kelly said that it's very unusual to see anyone under the ages of 8. But for those between the ages of 10 and 11, for example, where puberty could have an impact on the individual and their experience of gender dysphoria. So at this stage, it's going to be mainly parent work. So it's supporting the individual, weighing up like the best course of action, as well as liaising with the schools. And then for those who are older, it's also a collaborative approach, again, with the parents and the individual, schools, etc. involved. But there will be more emphasis on the individual to say, you know, having a say in it. And so they might be discussing questions like, what does gender identity mean to them, gender stereotypes, relations with other people. But what's also really interesting is that 1 in 3 people that went to the Tavistock Gender Identity Services, they had some sort of neurodivergent condition. So at Gender Plus, they'll also be offering, for example, autism assessments to go alongside these gender assessments to also try and understand how does their neurodiversity play within that.
So a lot of that is kind of talking therapies. At what stage then can these people under the age of 18 be offered sex hormones, surgeries, puberty blockers?
So Gender Plus, they won't be offering puberty blockers as like a standalone. In June this year, NHS England decided that there's just not enough evidence to support like the safety, clinical effectiveness and cost effectiveness of puberty blockers. And Dr. Kelly also added that for those aged between 15 and 16, especially for girls, you know, the process of puberty has already taken place. So puberty blockers aren't that effective in that way. But in terms of sex hormones, that will be offered to those who are 16 and over. But for an individual who is of age to be given sex hormones, that will only take place at the end of the gender assessment. It won't be taking place during. And then in terms of surgeries, that's for those 18 and over. Yeah. And I basically just went to speak to him and said, you know, for 16-year-olds, how can they be fully conscious about making decisions about sex hormones?
These aren't things that people come to lightly. These aren't things that people wake up one day and think, oh, I fancy doing that. I guess that's why we do things slowly. We try to think of things holistically, and we try to understand what has brought someone to this position, and try to think quite kind of pragmatically and practically with them and their support network around the different pros and cons and the dilemmas that come around each decision. Obviously, as I said, we don't consider surgeries until people are over the age of 18, and we're starting at 16 and above. And so I guess you're dealing with people who are at an age when they do have we are able to make assumptions about what someone can decide around their life. And so I suppose there's age of voting, driving cars, all these sorts of things that us as a society have to kind of make a decision on. about how much freedom and independence are we going to allow our citizens. And I suppose this is partially about a level of bodily autonomy. This is someone who's trying to live their life, it's their body, while also trying to safeguard and protect them about potentially regretting something down the line. So I get both sides, and that's why we kind of try to be as cautious and comprehensive as possible with that, really. But I guess the alternative of just doing nothing has consequences. And I think what we're seeing with what's happening in the kind of wider NHS system is that, unfortunately, people are desperate and are being driven to places and spaces where they are not being afforded opportunities to think things through carefully. They're not perhaps being properly medically supervised, and their health is being compromised, and their mental and physical health is being compromised as a result. And so I guess this is happening. The phenomenon, or you want to call it, the genie is out of the bottle. Trans people aren't going to go away. We need to try to work with them, help them to access the care that they need, while also keeping them safe and allowing them engage in society in a meaningful way, really.
Jo, we've heard cases here on Times Radio where individuals who've gone through gender reassignment have regretted it. Some have detransitioned. What did Dr. Kelly have to say about that?
So I did ask him if he could give a breakdown on the number of individuals who have undergone hormones and surgeries and as a result have had their gender dysphoria resolved in some sort of way. And he said to me that he couldn't give me a number on that, but he sort of turned the question on its head, and he said that he believed it to be around 1% who choose to detransition. However, he caveated this by saying that this is an under-researched area. People may choose not to disclose that they detransition to those medical professionals and things like that. So again, there's still a lot more to be done in terms of research into this.
So if someone does go through this kind of medical treatment, what type of protections are in place, particularly for young people?
So Gender Plus, it's currently not regulated by the Care Quality Commission. They did apply, but the CQC said that it wasn't under their jurisdiction, basically. But because they've got this hormone clinic opening up, they are applying again. And this is important because sex hormones, surgeries, they can have permanent impacts on individuals, such as breast growth, deepening of voice, things like that. So it's important to make sure that especially young individuals aren't going to regret their choices in the future. So I did ask Dr. Kelly, can you guarantee that every young individual who comes to Gender Plus won't detransition in the future? And this is what he said.
Well, first of all, nobody can guarantee that a young person going down this pathway won't detransition in the future. And if they do guarantee that, I would be worried. And I'm sure, for me at some point, that will happen too. And so I absolutely can't guarantee that. I guess what's unique to our service is actually what we do, which is in addition to what they do in the NHS service. We offer a mental health and a neurodevelopmental assessment and treatment service, I suppose. So we, for people who might be neurodiverse or have other mental health needs, we will try to meet those within the same service, and we're part of the same team. We've got psychiatry, we've got psychology, so I guess in that holistic approach, I suppose, we don't have crystal balls. No one can ever know what will happen in the future, but we can go through the process as comprehensively and as thoughtfully as possible. And I guess ending at what I always talk with families about is making thoughtful decisions. And I think that's the best we can do, given what we know about this population group and what we know about the treatment options, is to approach this with caution and care, but also not shy away from making those decisions too, really.
Jo, thank you so much. Jo Crawford, Times Radio reporter, with her story there. You can read much more about this in the paper today.